recording. I
Okay.
planned that, so I wouldn't be on the recording.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. So as you can see, our topic today is trying to avoid loss control, the value of UPRT. So we're here to talk about UPRT for general aviation specifically. We've got a small panel of instructors to discuss the various aspects of UPRT for general aviation, to include what it is, its value, the current status of pilot skills as it relates to UPRT, and address some of the audience's concerns and questions about UPRT. With that, let me make some brief introductions. Okay, so I am Mike Kloch, and I'm CEO, instructor, pilot, chief instructor pilot, at Specialized Aero Works in Bend, Oregon. Two-time master CFI aerobatic. There's also a two-time NAFI master CFI, that's National Association of Flight Instructors. I'm an FAA safety team representative. I also work as a contract test pilot and instructor for Epic Aircraft and others. My former life is a Marine Corps F-18 pilot. I was a school-trained aviation safety officer and went through the Naval Postgraduate School course. And I was also the safety and standardization officer for all Marine Corps Reserve F-18s for a bit. And next to our panelists, we've got Pete Vapor Reddan. He's the owner of Vapor Global Aviation near Memphis, Tennessee. He's also an FAA safety team representative. And Pete works as a designated pilot examiner also, along with teaching UPRT at his business. Pete was a former Air Force T6 instructor and evaluator pilot, which included UPRT, former FBI UPRT contract instructor pilot. Pete also was an Air Force C-17 instructor pilot, a KC-10 aircraft commander, and was the recipient of the James H. Doolittle Trophy in the KC-10. Finally, we've got Rich Dizzy Stowell. Rich is a master of CFI aerobatic emeritus. He's a 2014 National FAA Safety Team Rep of the Year, 2006 National Flight Instructor of the Year. He's a charter and life member of SAFE. That's the Society of Aviation Flight Educators. He's an architect of modern UPRT for GA. And if you can see on his logo there, the original UPRT program since 1987. So I'll tell you, Rich has been doing this a while. And as a modern architect for GA, right, he basically created this niche for general aviation. He's the author of books, videos, papers on UPRT, webinars and seminars. There's far too many to list. So welcome to our panels. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Kuku.
All right, so let's get started. Our first questions for the audience. How would you define UPRT? So please put some answers in chat box. Try to keep them relatively short, but we would like to get an idea of what perceptions are out there in the audience. Chat is disabled. Is the chat working? Someone says chat is disabled.
Okay. Yeah, they're popping up in the Q&A.
Oh, the chat. Okay, I'm on the wrong.
They just haven't used the Q&A for now.
Yeah. Use the Q&A.
Okay, I'm not seeing that. Okay.
Yep.
There comes
So-
one. Unintentional loss control of the aircraft. Another one, learning how to get the airplane out of any situation you can get into. You are in and out of control situation. That's an upset. Is it upset prevention recovery training so we don't crash? Staying alive when you've entered an unusual attitude. How to save your life when plane's out of control. Recover from unusual / unanticipated attitude. Invert and spin entry. Trying to mitigate the threat of lock-eye, loss of control in flight. Flight in all attitudes. Okay. So it's like, that's what we have for right now. All right, we discussed and clarified that. Anybody want to take that first on the clarifying UPRT?
Go ahead,
Rich?
Pete. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to zero in on the unusual attitude piece of this. So UPRT, you're basically one, preventing upsets in the first place, and two, if you get into an upset, get out of the upset in the appropriate way without panic. But let's talk unusual attitudes versus upsets, because I think there's a difference there, and I even believe that the FAA has a different definition for each. Unusual attitudes are your plus or minus 10 degrees in pitch, and probably your plus or minus 30, I think the FAA may say 45, in your roll, where an upset could be any attitude beyond those to include the inverted. So we're definitely have to talk about the bigger envelope of what the aircraft could do.
Right. So, and of course, the initials UPRT sort of tell you what it's about. It's about prevention and recovery. There's actually a third prong to that that's before prevention, and that's the awareness. So we have awareness, prevention, and recovery. And a lot of what the three of us do and others in the UPRT training space is try to make pilots a little bit more aware of what they're actually asking the airplane to do. That's where it all starts, right? Most of these upsets, by and large in GA, are pilot induced, or at least pilot driven up to some point. And so if a pilot's unaware that applying the rudder to try to tighten a turn from base to final is maybe not a good thing to do, that's where we really have to begin. So we're trying to make the pilots more aware of what they're doing with the controls. Then we can talk about, all right, so now you're aware, how do you prevent? And then, okay, failing that, you have to move on to recovery. And that's, by the time you're at recovery, you're pretty well stuck in a corner, and there's usually only one way out, where prevention and the awareness parts of it, you have a lot more options. Mike?
Yep, it's all good stuff. Another part I just thought of is some people say, oh, UPRT is for when the airplane, say weather causes your airplane to go out of control. And just as you said, it's really about the pilot. There's other factors, right? Aircraft failures, system failures, autopilot failures, weather. But in GA, the statistics say a lot of it's the pilot. So we have to look, it can be all encompassing, right? UPRT can cover a lot of things and teach someone how to fly so much better too. Anything to add to that?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So the next thing. All right. Who can benefit from UPRT, and with also what kind of pilots are taking UPRT currently? You want to lead that, Rich?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the second one first. And over the years, we've seen more and more organizations take a proactive stance with requiring their pilots to take some kind of either spin training or the broader upset prevention and recovery training. And we see pilots from the National Park Service, from Fish and Wildlife Service. We have Alaska State Troopers. You have California Highway Patrol, Border Patrol, some Department of Agriculture. I think Pete can speak to FBI and some of those other agencies. Corporate flight departments. You have, I see Norm is on from APS down in Mesa. So they deal with a lot of the corporate flight departments and certainly the airlines. So a lot of these organized groups are requiring their pilots because they certainly see value in improved awareness, prevention, and certainly the recovery side. I'll let Pete handle the first part unless he's got some more to add with the second part.
Yeah, so thanks, Rich. I'll go with who can benefit from UPRT. So everyone, period, dot, end of story. For my course, you have to be at least a private pilot. I don't go with student pilots because I think a student pilot is just kind of learning the basics and working their way through a learning process to get to the point where they would then benefit from UPRT. Certainly if you want to talk spins, a student pilot could certainly benefit from some spin training. But UPRT, I think private pilots and above, I think everybody can benefit from it, especially those that maybe are aircraft owners who use their aircraft on a regular basis to further their businesses. And they might be going through some challenging weather or some challenging scenarios, literally going cross country across the country. What kind of pilots are taking UPRT? So right now, what I'm seeing in my course, I'm seeing flight instructors who are looking at it from a defensive techniques standpoint. So they're coming in and they're going, what happens if the student gets me into this scenario, or how do I prevent the student from getting me in that scenario in the first place? And I also see the other side where I have private pilots who maybe have that first 25 or 50 hours of flight time after their exam, and now they're ready for some follow-on training. Really, there's nothing much in between. I don't see the instrument or the commercial students or instrument or commercial rated pilots for this right now. It's usually flight instructors or private pilots. And the other good thing, and Mike, you can correct me, but I think for both you and I, our courses are in the Wings program. So I see a lot of folks who are involved in doing Wings work and getting credit for that work participating as well.
That's great. Yeah. It seems to be undeniable. Anybody and everybody should do UPRT. And as you know, growing up as a military pilot, we start out in all attitudes. So we just grow up with that and was never afraid of it, because it's how you started when you learned how to fly. And there's so much fear now of more than 30 degrees bank. It's amazing. So this is one of the ways, just expanding your envelope even a little bit makes a huge difference. So that leads you to who can benefit, right? And then to the CFI part also, right? One of the statistics I had, SAFE reports, they did a survey, and 65% of instructors surveyed have had to forcibly take the controls from pilot in training. I was amazed that it was that high. I knew it was pretty bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. And sometimes that's going to lead to upsets. Part of that's also learning self-defense, unfortunately, as an instructor, which is one of the things I teach. So really, every CFI should have some expanded envelope capabilities, and because of the situations they get into. And they become better teachers though too. I taught a college program through a college program, and it was a long UPRT course, and the difference was night and day in the instructors. Okay, anything more on that?
I think we're good.
Okay, we're good there. We're doing good on time. On to our next question. So in general, what's the current state of new pilot skills, and also what about new CFIs? Pete, you want as a DPE, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so I did about 175 exams last year, in all levels, private through CFI initial. And what we saw, and it was supported by data released earlier this year, is that the pass rates have been dropping across the board for private instrument commercial and CFI. They've kind of leveled out a little bit here in the first quarter of the year, but we still see private pilot dropping in pass rates. So if we go with just the overall 50,000 foot raw data, we could say that new pilot skill levels are decreasing or have decreased. New CFIs, and Mike, I'm glad to hear that you do the CFI defensive techniques. That's probably the weakest area I see on the CFI initial exam that I give in my POA. The peek behind the curtain. If you take a CFI exam with me, you're going to take the airplane from me as the student at least once, if not 3 times, because somehow we've lost that. And Mike, you and I going through military training, that's kind of really honed in the military. You have to protect, the taxpayer's asset, if you will, and you have to protect your life, and you have to protect the student, the learner's life. And I don't see that as much in civilian aviation. So that gets tested. What I do see, though, is when I see those private pilots with their 25-hour-old certificate, with the CFIs who maybe have 100 hours of dual given, who have realized, hey, I'd like to get a little bit better, or maybe I've identified a weakness. And I'm not trying to kibosh any kind of long course, UPRT long course, but what I can say is you could do a 1-day course or a half-day course that includes some very targeted ground training, and I don't say an hour or two of flight, I say a flight or two, because depending on the individual, they may not last an hour in the airplane, and that's okay. We want positive experiences, not negative experiences. And you could walk away so much more enlightened and so much more confident in what is out there, and the fear of the unknown is begun to erase. At that point, the pilot that showed up at 8 a.m. is not the same pilot that's leaving at noon. And I have a half-a-day course that I do with folks, and it really makes a big difference. And then you can always come back for more if you want.
But you, Rich?
Yeah, so of course, Pete is seeing the product, right? He's the ultimate arbiter of the product and allowing people into the private pilot realm. And of course, Mike, you and I, and I'm sure Pete does as well. We all see on a daily basis, and I have since 1987. That really hasn't changed. What that product really looks like, right? And of course, we only see the pilots who are recognizing the need for additional training, because there are gaps, there are unanswered questions, there are concerns, and in some cases, maybe even apprehension. So we're kind of seeing maybe the tip of the iceberg, the proactive tip, whereas there can be a lot of other people underneath that just don't know where to go. They're not sure what to do next. Unfortunately, a lot of them will drop out of aviation, which is unfortunate, because it doesn't have to be that way. And a lot of that is just the way the flight training system is set up. And this gets to talking about the flight instructors. And we just have this continual generational loss of skill and knowledge, and new CFIs only know, all of us for that matter, we're all products of our flight instructors. And so new CFIs only know what their CFIs know, and it kind of goes back several generations. And so a lot of that institutional knowledge is being lost, and the focus maybe is in the wrong place. It's on passing the test, whereas our mission as flight instructors is not to teach to pass the test. It's to create problem solvers, pilots who can operate at the correlation level. And so I think a related problem to this, and you, Mike and Pete, coming from your military background, you guys are always training, right? If it's not a mission, which is probably a smaller percentage of your flying time, you're always training. And in your mindset, training is normal and necessary. And that's a phrase that we're trying to use now. But if you consider, if the state of current flight instruction, if students are becoming private pilots in spite of maybe subpar flight instruction, and I'm just talking globally, there are plenty of excellent instructors out there. What incentive do they have to go back to what they perceive maybe as subpar or poor instruction to try to do more proficiency stuff? There's no incentive for them to do other than the minimum 1 hour every 2 years as flight review. And what we're trying to do is elevate that, certainly point people in a direction of UPRT instructors who are dedicated to that. And we spend a lot of time, Mike, you can talk to this, a lot of time initially just not only reviewing basic piloting skills, but improving those skills so we can just move on to the true UPRT part of it. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, yeah, great stuff.
Hey, Mike, I have one quick save round, and you kind of hit on it a little earlier. One of the things I do see in private and commercial exams, which kind of rolls into this whole UPRT thing, a lot recently, probably in the last 6 months of last year, a lot of applicants in these VFR exams, they're not going past standard rate return when they're just out flying. And some of them won't go past a standard rate turn in the traffic pattern. So you're talking 15, maybe 20 degrees of bank. And if we're limiting that incorrectly to go to 30 in a normal VFR environment, we're setting ourselves up, we're shrinking the envelope, and then more things become upsets. And so then you need upset training even more because you've limited your envelope so much to the center of the envelope, as opposed to a little bit wider. So just something I observed the end of last year.
Yeah, absolutely agree. If you're only using 4% of the envelope, there's a lot of the world out there that's really scary when you're afraid to get more than 20 degrees bank, right? So that's what an easy way, right, is get comfortable. That's one of the first things I do with a pilot training is I'll ask them, what's the steepest bank you've been to? Usually 45, maybe. Okay, well, let's go to 50 and to 60, and then we'll work our way up to 90 and see that, you're not going to fall out of the sky. It's not that hard to control. So it's, you start that basic envelope expansion. And I also query everyone that comes in, and how's your instructor with stalls? And more than 50%, maybe 75% of the time I get, they didn't like it so much. And that is, to me, is just amazing in such a bad way, because a stall is not hard to fix. I've done literally thousands. If I keep going, I'm going to be approaching Rich's number of spins with stalls, because I do a lot of stalls, and guess what? I'm 100% successful, and it's the simplest movement, right? Move to the unload position. So, and a lot don't realize how simple it is, and they create this fear of it. So there's one of the most basic things that just needs to be fixed, let alone doing slipping stalls and all other fun ways of stalling airplane. So that's just an indicator of skill levels. And then with that, I've had corrected several people who want to add 10 knots to their approach speed because they're afraid of getting too slow. And I don't realize being fast is as or more dangerous than being a little bit slow. And, and that's when we have airplanes skipping down the runway, running off the end, nose wheel strikes, all the things that come from that. So things to fix with CFIs. And of course, we had this mass hiring for the airlines for several years, right? So anyone can fog a mirror that has the number of hours in paper gets hired. So no one sticks around to flight school very long. And so we keep making a copy of a copy that ends up a little bit fuzzy at the end, right? So things that you've both alluded to that I think we need to address. And instead of just teaching to the syllabus, let's teach to the maximum envelope that your airplane's capable of. It would go a long ways.
So Mike, I'm just looking at, we got two pretty good questions here. And Rich, I didn't mean to cut you off if you wanted to take one. There was a question, do you train to 90 degrees of bank? And I'm assuming that was for the VFR private pilot, commercial pilot comments. So no, according to ACS and according to Airplane Flying Handbook, we're training to either 45 or 60 degrees of bank with private or commercial pilots. And that's where you want to get comfortable. And you're going to train at that altitude at 1,500 feet or above for those steep turns, if you will. But you got to remember, we got to correlate that back. And most of everything that we do out in the practice area correlates back to the traffic pattern. So if you're on downwind and you have a traffic conflict with somebody on the 45, or maybe you're catching up to somebody on the downwind, you can do a turn around a point, which requires 30 degrees of bank. You're already established on the downwind. You do a turn around a point. It brings you right back to the downwind. You've got your spacing. You've created, you've stopped the conflict of traffic. What happens if you say, oh, well, maybe I don't need to do a steep turn. And now all of a sudden you realize, oh, I waited too long. And now I have to do, something to prevent a conflict in the traffic pattern. So again, we don't want to encourage people to do steep turns below 1,500 feet, but if you're in the traffic pattern, now's the time to do a steep turn. And we want to be well-versed in those 30 and 45, and if it's commercial, 55 degrees of bank. So I hope that answers that 90-degree bank question. And then Dr. Joe McMurray, a great comment there, and UPRT is not acro, and I think, Rich, I might let you take this one, but the bottom line is UPRT, I think we might get to it in the slides here. It's ground training, it's flight training, and it's very specific procedures and parameters that are based on FAA guidance, Part 121 guidance from the airlines, and EASA, or the European equivalent of the FAA guidance, from people who have been doing this, who are professionals. They've thought through it. They understand the aerodynamics and the physics of it. It's not just, hey, if you put 15 gallons of gas in my aerobatic airplane, I'll take you up and do UPRT, and you just do a bunch of aerobatics. So it's not that. Rich, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I do. And hi, Joe. Good to see you on here tonight. The simplest way to distinguish between aerobatic training and upset prevention and recovery training is this. Aerobatic training teaches you how to do the maneuvers correctly. Upset prevention recovery training is how to recover from all the screw ups. And so if you think of it in a continuum of non-UPRT, non-aerobatic flight training, the traditional flight training, UPRT fills that gap. It takes you one level beyond what you would normally get in your normal flight training, and then you can return to your normal flight training with more confidence, more competence, and more experience. Some of the novelty's taken off, and you really know where the edges of the envelope are. And then if you want to continue on to aerobatic training, well, by taking UPRT first, which is how we've been teaching it since 1987, you pass through UPRT on your way to basic aerobatics. You've already experienced all of the screw ups. And so if you fall out of your loop or your hammerhead, you've seen that before and you know how to recover. So it's really a gap filler between normal flight training, traditional training, and aerobatic training. Requires a little different skill set too. Just because you have, as Pete said, just because somebody teaches aerobatics does not necessarily mean that they are a good UPRT instructor. It's a little different skill set. Mike,
Those are
back to you.
good points. I always recommend UPRT first, just for those same reasons, and explain it's not aerobatics. Even though you may do aerobatic maneuvering, right? But we got to teach startle. You got to learn how to deal with startle effect. Otherwise, you're not getting the full deal there that you need to get. All right, good stuff. All right, we're ready to move on. Our next one: what makes a good or qualified UPRT instructor? Want to hit that, Rich?
Why don't you start first, Mike? Since
Okay.
you're one.
Well, you've already, I just got lucky. Well, like I said, grow up in the military, you learn UPRT from the start, but you're also going to have to be well versed in all attitudes, right? Committed to good instruction. You can learn the process, right? There's a lot of reading. When I got ready for this, I actually prepared for about 2 years before I started doing it, and researching everything that was out there, all the documents, right? So there was a lot of prep, reading a lot of Rich's stuff, by the way. So thanks for that, Rich, because you got a lot of good material. So that's to start off with. Those are some of the items it takes, right? So all attitude, in-depth knowledge of how an airplane works in all those attitudes, which is not learned from regular flight schools. So, and a wide variety more. So Rich, why don't you fill in the gaps?
Sure. Thanks for that. And hey, Pete, I'll send you that check for that plug on the book there when we're done here tonight. But I think a lot of the qualities that make a good UPRT instructor are the same qualities for any good instructor, right? And it all starts with patience, a deep understanding of the material, a comfort level with working with different students and kind of tailoring your approach to their different learning styles. So all of that certainly applies to the UPRT instructor. And especially with what we do with the upset training, we have to be a little bit more in tune with the psychological aspects, I think, of our trainees, right? Because they are coming to us. Somebody who wants to take aerobatic training, they're excited to do that, right? Somebody who's coming to us probably has some fear or misunderstandings that we're trying to address. And so there is that psychological component. They are going to expose, in a lot of cases, their innermost fears and maybe apprehensions about, are they good enough to be pilots? And we just have to take that as part of the training, right? It's all normal. We're all human beings. We all go through the same learning curve. We might be at different points on the learning curve. So patience is very important. and also understanding how you work in a progressive way. You don't just take people out on the first flight and subject them to, 320 turn spins and call that good. You have to build them up to it, right? And continually build on prior skills with the new skills. And I tell people, that the only time, as an instructor, the only time I take the controls, or every time I take the controls, something bad happens and the trainee has to fix it. So they don't want me to fly the airplane. Pete, how about you?
Yeah. So, two of us were lucky enough to go through military training, and we learned our UPRT there, our all attitude training there. And then when I transitioned over to the civilian flying again, I was a CFI for the entire time I was in the Air Force. I had to learn how to fly civilian again and how to talk civilian again and interact with civilians again. And I had a very good mentor who owned the flight school that I was operating for him. And he was a Part 121 guy, and he did upset prevention recovery training through his 121 career. And he took me out and we flew probably 5 or 6 hours and probably did 18 or 19 hours of ground training just to understand, to get to an operable level for me to just start doing UPRT comfortably. The other piece of this would be, does the instructor have a syllabus? And this is kind of hitting on what Rich was talking about. Is there a syllabus? Is there a planned flow? Are there case scenarios involved? What are the source documents that the UPRT instructor is basing all of their instruction on? They should be able to answer that. Any one of the three of us can tell you, here's our source documents, this is what we're basing it on, and this is what we remain within. And it's not about, UPRT, it shouldn't be about high G, high stress. It should be that building block approach that Rich says. I provide in my big UPRT course, it's 2 hours of flying. It may only be 2 flights of 40 minutes, but if the individual is ready after the second debrief and they're like, you know what, I really want to try and go that one more time. Well, sure, we'll go one more time. We'll make it 3 flights. Sometimes after the first 30 minutes, it's time out. I'm done. We land and come back the next day or the next week. So I think there's a different approach to UPRT in knowing how much the learner can handle and where the credibility stands with the syllabus from the instructor.
Those are great points, and that made me think of spin endorsements. Their national average for a spin endorsement is abysmally bad, to put it bluntly, right? Where there is no standard in most, and that's another thing I query every instructor comes through. What'd you do for spin endorsement? And you usually get 15 minutes of ground and 2 spins each direction. And now you're supposed to be competent with spins. And it just doesn't happen because anyone's taught spins, right? And I'll start out 1 turn spin at the most, and it takes many repetitions to really get it down to where you can do it well. And then let alone, you play bad student and let the endorsement, the CFI candidate practice teaching and recovering from a botched spin. It's eye opener, but it makes a huge difference with at least 2 flights and a lot of spin entries, right? It makes a big difference. So, which is slightly related to UPRT instructor, but another place where we have weakness in the system.
Yeah, Pete, I'm sorry, Mike, Mary asked a really good question. How do you assess how much a UPRT student can handle? Some of that, again, goes back to our experience working with a diverse group of trainees in this particular environment. And there are telltale signs, but by and large, everybody falls in the bell curve. Everybody's going to go through the same kind of process. But I think a lot of it stems, as Pete said, you're following a syllabus, so the trainee knows what they're going to be doing. You brief that, and you brief it in as much detail as possible beforehand. So again, you brief the plan, you fly the plan, and you don't deviate from that, right? So the student knows exactly where they're going with it. And yeah, they're going to be nervous because let's face it, I tell people the first 1,000 spins are the hardest, right? And so you just have to kind of keep working with them, ask them how they're doing. I use a very simple scale. I'll ask on a scale of 1 to 10, where a 10 means you've never felt better in your entire life. Tell me what your number is. And if they're above a 7, we can continue working, right? If they hit a 7, so from 10 to 7 is a linear scale, but from a 7 to a 2 is not linear. It's like falling off the table. So if they're at a 7, it's time to go back. Time to go back, take a break, refresh, come back the next day, or take a 2-hour break, get some fluids in you and everything else. And usually that works out fine. I can still count and still have a digit or 2 left over after 36 years of doing this. The number of times people will actually get sick. So it's more of a psychological thing, and we as UPRT instructors are sensitive to that, and we will work at your pace. And as long as you're feeling good, we're going to keep pushing you along. Pete, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's something I do. I'm a 1 to 100 scale, and as soon as that needle comes off about 97, it's time to go back, and because you want to have a positive learning experience, not a negative one. Now, on the flip side of that, I carry like 25-gallon hefty trash bags up in the front cockpit of my Citabria. So if you do get sick, you can't miss, right? So you bring a little humor in, you're prepared for the worst, if you will, the worst scenario. But at the same time, it could be seen as a little bit of a failure on the instructor to not understand where the applicant, I say applicant because I'm a DP, where the learner is in the learning process. Because as soon as that motion sickness is triggered, the brain is going to flush out everything that was just learned, because now we're focused on embarrassment and feeling bad, and we got to make it all the way back to the airport. So make sure that UPRT instructor is sensitive to that and is willing to adjust flight times as required.
Yeah, Mike, let me just add, I think what we're all alluding to as good instructors, and this goes to any good instructor, not just UPRT, who are we there to serve, right? We're not there to serve us, we're serving the student. And that's really the bottom line.
Customer service should be huge. Yeah, for me, and you can start out with an awareness just by asking some questions on the ground. And sometimes I've had some who were a bit nervous, and you put them at ease, right? But then you get in the airplane. It's amazing after a little experience how much you can tell about a person by looking at the back of their head and talking to them. you can actually tell quite a bit with a little practice. So, it's, always try not, some people push it, right? And some will go, no, I could do another. And then it's one too many. And then maybe they're all feel bad about it. And I'm like, hey, don't worry about it, And I always try to feel at ease. I used to get sick in the beginning when I first in flight school, and each of my 3 training planes in the military, I threw up in them. And he's pushed through. So I'm very sympathetic to motion sickness, and as we all should be, right? So you hear the stories of someone taking some flying and they say they wanted to make try and throw up. Like, you do not like repeat customers? So why would you do that to anybody? It just doesn't seem right.
And Rich, I think you were answering it, the instructional knowledge on the spin training. We've been focusing on UPRT, and I break out the two. There's UPRT and then there's spin training. I think they're separate things in my opinion. And then there's the spin endorsement. And if you're going to get a spin endorsement, I'll just pause on this or stop on this for 1 second. If you're going to get a spin endorsement because you want to become a CFI, in my opinion, the training should go along the lines of the advisory circular that's out there for stall spin awareness. And it should be something of the instructor who's potentially giving you an endorsement teaches the way you should be able to teach on an exam, as well as beyond the exam for the spin. Then you switch roles, you get up and teach to the instructor who just taught you how to teach spins, and work through those processes, work through the verbal part of teaching and drawing on a whiteboard kind of thing. And then that moves to the airplane. and we do it in the airplane. So it's not necessarily, hey, I went up and did 47 spins, I got my spin endorsement. There are people who can go up and do 4, 5, or 6 spins and have that instructional capability already there. And it's more about the instructional capability than it is about how many spins you do. So I just wanted to pause there. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah, sure. And totally agree. I think everyone who listens to this webinar, first thing you should do is go on the FAA website and download a copy of AC 6167 Charlie, change 2 is the current one, stall and spin awareness training. It gives you the guidance on what you should have been receiving at the private level, the commercial level, the CFI level. And I still ask people today, and this advisory circular came out, the first one in 1991. And most pilots aren't getting that material. You should be able to take that to an instructor and say, what about this? What about this? So hopefully out of this, the instructors will improve, but also we want you to be better consumers of flight training services. And part of that is arming yourself and asking the questions. Mike, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks. Well, where should pilots go to seek good UPRT instruction? Where can we find those instructors?
I would,
Yeah.
so I'm a member of IAC, International Aerobatic Club. And I know in our area, IAC3, we have a website and we list all the UPRT providers in our section of the country. So that I think that's one good place to start. Obviously the Google search is always there. Rich, do you have any hidden secrets, or are we as UPRT providers, are we still unorganized in the grand scale and we need to bring it together?
Yes, we are. And there are several pushes. I'm sure most of us and several people on here have tuned into some of the LinkedIn Live events that's put on by Aviation Performance Solutions, because they're doing a good job of spearheading that at the corporate and airline level. But what about us down here at GA, right? And if we can start incorporating on a consistent level early, then by the time they do arrive at the corporate or airline level, it's not totally new and foreign knowledge to them, and maybe even not even foreign experience, because they've had some of that already. And so we're trying to work together, right, and trying to bring others along as well, and trying to push that along. So we do the best we can. And as you said, Pete, if we go back to the source documents, right, AC 6167 Charlie is our starting point. Chapter 4 in the, I think it's now chapter 5 in the latest airplane flying handbook. There's a chapter on upset prevention and recovery training that we had a little bit of a hand in at least forming with terminology. So that's a good start as well. And I think if more instructors and other non-instructors, for that matter, start reading these source documents, that will make them better informed when they start interacting with instructors and asking the questions.
We'll have resources at the end. So if you wait to the last slide, everyone, then we'll give you that. But IAC is one of those. They have a list of schools, and then anybody can post in there. So also vet any school you want to go to. Okay. How about some common apprehensions and barriers to UPRT? Let's take that one first.
I will. So I touched on this already. So
yeah.
One of the barriers is the fact that we lose anywhere from 60 to 80% of student pilots who drop out, less because of the cost of training, but because of the poor quality of flight instruction. And then the remaining 20 or 30% who push through, close to half of those are failing at the check ride level to get their private, and they persist. And so despite all of that, they persist to get to the private. And then again, what incentive do they have after going through a suboptimal training experience and really a slog to want to take something else? So that's one barrier to maybe wanting to take additional recurrent training. And it could be UPRT, it could be a tailwheel endorsement, it could be float training, it could be any of those additional things. The nice thing about these courses is they're short courses, right? It's not a 40-hour or a 70-hour slog and takes a whole year. You can go through tailwheel courses, UPRT, spin training, you can go through the The float plane training, short courses, right? A matter of days if you want to do it back to back. So I think we just need to educate pilots about what good UPRT is, what the good instructors are, like in these types of webinars, and encourage them that they're going to learn more. This is typical. I know Pete and Mike can attest to this as well. Typical that after 3 hours or 5 hours, whatever length training it is, because it is highly concentrated, a lot of pilots say they've learned more in those 3 to 5 hours than maybe in the last 100 hours or maybe ever in their flying career. So you can really exponentially increase skills and knowledge and comfort level and competence. So I'll let Pete throw in some of the other parts to that, maybe the apprehension side.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's a big important piece of who you select as a UPRT instructor. You're coming into this potentially not knowing what to expect, not ever being upside down. And again, the building blocks, there's a question there that says, you know, what's the procedure for UPRT? I guess that, you know, we're asking kind of what that looks like. So like Rich said, we want to do building blocks. So my syllabus, if you will, hour number 1 is talking about the airplanes, the parachutes, how to do a parachute landing fall, how to operate the parachute if we need to use it, how to get out of the airplane if we need to get out of the airplane because we can't recover from whatever upset that we're in for whatever reason. We go through all the safety briefing because that's the most important thing. So I use the law of primacy on that, and we do that up front. And then the second hour, we use case studies, and I have 5 case studies that I like to use that throughout aviation history that UPRT would have been very effective if used properly in those 5 case studies. And then we talk about, okay, here's how we're going to fly the airplane. Here are the 4 to 8 kind of canned upsets that you could find yourself in out in the general aviation community. And, you know, someone also asked, you know, what's the procedure? What's the most important when you're doing it? So if you read all the source documents that we give you, and Rich and Mike will correct me because I still carry some negative transfer from my military training, but what we're trying to teach is power, pitch, roll. So proper power, pitch, release the G, move towards a neutral setting or push on the stick to get the airplane unloaded and not and away from a stall, lowering the angle of attack, and then roll the airplane in whatever direction you need to roll it to get back to the horizon in the quickest way possible. So I don't know that this discussion is about the specifics of UPRT. It's more about the importance of finding the right person, getting the right training, and then gaining the confidence that, hey, I have something valuable here that could save my life or my family's life down the road if the worst should ever happen with regards to pitch and roll with the aircraft.
Good stuff. Okay, so yeah, like you mentioned, fear of the unknown. That's one I see quite a bit of, and a dislike or fear of motion. And once again, like has been talked about, is building blocks, right? You don't like motion, we'll do a little bit, and we'll do a little bit more, and a little bit more, and you realize, oh, hey, I could do this. It's not so bad, right? So getting people over that fear is one of the first things. I think one of the other barriers I thought of is bad articles. A few years ago, someone wrote an article very negative about UPRT, right? APS did a great rebuttal to that, but there's clearly someone who had never done it before, because I've yet to meet a person who's taken UPRT and didn't go, that was the best thing I ever did. It's pretty much, just about the universal answer. So getting past that, and what's another reason we do webinars like this, to try to spread the word.
Sure. Let me add to that, Pete, I'll give you a shot here in 1 second. Everyone's looking for the quick fix, right? And so technology seems to be the bright, shiny object that everybody wants to gravitate to. And I think we make a false assumption about technology as always the fix to our loss of control problem. And I'm not against technology. I'm not against having additional tools as long as we understand how to use all of the tools, right? And all the tools have limitations of some kind, and we need to understand what those are. And so the bad assumption we make is that the pilots are already as well trained as they possibly can be. And the only way to take it that next level of safety is with technology. And I think we've all seen in what we do that that's not the case. There is a lot of additional skill building that's not being done during primary training that could be done to elevate the skill and the knowledge level to begin with. And I think what we do with upset prevention recovery training, filling that gap, pointing that out. And once you point some of those things out, a lot of that apprehension, Mike, as you said, goes away. And for a lot of people, flying actually becomes fun. It becomes the thing they thought it always would be, right? And I think we always need to keep that in mind. And when you go back to, what are some of the first steps you do in an upset? One of the first things you do is turn off the automation, which means your ability in the worst case scenario to recover is going to hinge on your stick and rudder skills. It's not technology. Pete?
No, you covered it in spades, Rich.
Yeah. You pretty much nailed that there. I had a thought, but I think it escaped me. Okay, one of the questions that came up was that we answered, does UPRT include equipment malfunctions? And yes, Rich teaches that, I do too. Pete, how about you?
I will go there if requested. I find that a lot of the folks that are coming to me are specifically looking to expand their personal aerodynamic envelope. So not so much emergency maneuvers training, but expanded envelope training. But if somebody says, hey, how do I land an airplane with a elevator disconnected? We'll certainly go through that process.
Yeah, and there's some of that should be covered in, say, private pilot, but it's not always. So I usually touch on that. What if your elevator fails? What if your aileron fails? How do you fly the airplanes? We cover that, and you can cover a lot of that pretty quickly. And everyone should have that, not have to think about what the answer to that is for basic control failures. Okay. How are we doing time? Okay. Oh, we're getting in time. So any other questions from the audience? This is your time.
Yeah, they can throw them either in the questions or in the chat, either one, because we'll be monitoring, and I'm sure we haven't answered every question out there.
Oh yeah. Well,
so fire away.
Mike, we've got one individual with his hand up. Let me see if I can. Robert Mitchell, do you still have a question, Robert? Let me allow you to talk. You can unmute now, Robert.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hey, I didn't really have a question. I kind of came in late, but obviously all the people that are discussing right now, Rich, Pete, and Mike, you guys definitely have the background. I teach at CAE. We kind of do the military training for the UPRT, and but Rich, I heard you hit a real good point there, and I've seen it in primary training in the General Aviation fleet for the last 40 years. And Pete said it also, you don't know what you don't know until you do something like this, then it really expands your envelope. And the confidence that the pilots gain from that, when they get into a bad situation, they're going to have the wherewithal to recognize and confirm that they are in an upset, and then they can recover, have the confidence to do that. So I agree. I may have missed the part about how you guys are, what is the industry attack on that, the general aviation. I know from my perspective, trying to get the right aerobatic aircraft and the insurance to cover that, and to get the clientele that is even interested in it is somewhat difficult. But boy, I would love to see this get attacked on the general aviation side. That would be a start big time for the industry.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And one of the things we're trying to do, Mike's in Oregon, I'm over here in Idaho, Pete's in Tennessee. And one of the things we're trying to do is find other people like us and make a community and interact and show that we are not on islands, right? We have common missions, we have common experiences, and we have common goals with what we're trying to do. And so I think that's one of the ways of of sort of linking all this together in a more cohesive way. I'll be
All right,
quiet. now.
yeah, thanks, Rich. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Robert.
And while we're waiting for some more, we had talked about, what makes a good UPRT instructor, and some people were saying, military versus civilian, old guy versus young person. What I just want to say there, and it may sound a little like sunshine, but at the end of the day, the standard is the standard, and we're either achieving a standard and teaching to the standard, or we're not. Whether that's the ACS, whether that's advisory circulars, that is the standard that we are supposed to wake up to every day and achieve every time, quote, we strap on an airplane and go fly. So it's not the exam. It's not only for the day of the exam. It's not only for the day of UPRT. It is every day that we wake up and we all look at our pilot certificate, and at the top of it, it says Federal Aviation Administration. That's who we're all FAA pilots, whether we like it or not. So we have to achieve and maintain that standard on a regular basis through proficiency.
Yeah, Mike, I see a question on here from Kristen. Do you think this is a training person should repeat? If so, at what frequency? And some people do. A lot of folks in GA might not necessarily, but I will tell you that some of the government organizations, they require a 3-year cycle, like Park Service and Fish and Wildlife, for their pilots to go through recurrent. And for the type of flying they're doing and their expertise coming in to begin with, a 3-year cycle is about right. But one of the things you can do is every 2 years for your flight review, treat yourself to something new and different. Maybe it's a UPRT program, maybe it's the float rating, maybe it's the tail wheel endorsement, and you can kind of cycle through. You can mix and match. You can do an hour every 3 months of something, and then an hour of something different every 3 months. But just kind of keep that lifelong learning mindset and do different things. Right, the more different things you can do, the more you have in your toolbox to pull from if you need it.
Yeah, all skills fade, so recurrence needed, right? Even if it's not yearly, like Rich said, maybe every 2 to 3 years, if you want to really keep your skills up. And it's usually a lot of fun anyways, so if you can do it, it's a good way to go. Okay, looks like we're getting there on time, so here's our resources page for everyone. Like we mentioned, the IAC has a directory of airbag schools. Rich also has this guidelines for all attitude training, the FAA, that's on the FAA's website, on the FAA safety website. So when you put that 2012, so it's been out for quite a while, but there's some good guidelines in there for those who want to find upset recovery training. Everybody should be reading Airplane Flying Handbook, Chapter 5. Right, everyone should have read that, and there's some good base knowledge in that, along with the other listed items. Okay, well, it's about time. Pete, you got any final comments?
Seek quality training on a regular basis.
How about you, Rich?
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions. After all, you're the one who is looking for the training. You're the one who's signing up for it. You are in charge of how your training goes. And like Pete said, if you don't like the answers you're getting or something doesn't seem right, find someone else. That may be hard to do because we might be scattered and few and far between, but it'll serve you well in the long run.
Related to something you said earlier, Rich, and it reminded me, right? If you think you've learned all there is to learn, then you just became dangerous, right? So we should all be seeking to get better all the time, no matter what it is we're doing, especially in aviation. Okay, so we're making a recording of this, so everyone knows, and we'll hopefully post this on our website soon for replay. So if you have any friends who think should see this or liked it, let them know and come back and look for that. And also, we're going to plan to have another webinar next month and look for an announcement on that fairly soon. So once again, if you have anybody you think should see it or you want to see more, then look for that. All right. Thanks for attending. Back to Joe.